All right, in this explainer, we're diving into what some are calling the new scramble for Africa. Now, for decades, global powers had been competing for influence on the continent, right? But today, that whole game is changing, and it's changing faster than ever. So let's break down who the key players are, and more importantly, what they really want.
You know, it wasn't that long ago that this comment from a sitting U.S. president really marked a low point, a real low point in U.S.-Africa relations. It basically signaled a period where the U.S. kind of stepped back, pulled back its diplomatic engagement. The continent was seen mainly as, well, a battleground for its competition with China. And when a major power steps back like that, it creates a vacuum. And you know who stepped right into that vacuum? Two other major powers, China and Russia. I mean, they saw a huge opportunity, and they moved in, each with their own very distinct goals and strategies. And in doing so, they completely started to alter the geopolitical landscape.
Okay, but now it looks like the U.S. is trying to get back in the game. The Biden administration has come out and said it's all in on Africa's future. And look, they're putting some serious money where their mouth is. We're talking investment packages totaling well over $10 billion. That's a pretty clear signal that, yeah, the U.S. is trying to play catch-up.
And it's not just about the money either. We're seeing this major diplomatic push. You've got top-level officials, Vice President Harris, Secretary Blinken, even President Biden himself, making trips all across the continent. This is a very direct effort to rebuild those relationships and to show that the U.S. is serious about being a partner again, trying to move past those years of, well, relative neglect.
So that brings us to the big question. How do these three powers actually operate on the continent? Let's get into it and really break down their playbooks because, trust me, their strategies could not be more different.
And this really lays out the stark contrast, doesn't it? You've got China, which is absolutely playing the long game. They're using these big strategic economic tools, think infrastructure loans, to try and align the global system with their interests. Then you have Russia. Their approach is way more opportunistic, even disruptive. They're often deploying private military forces, like the infamous Wagner Group, to gain influence and basically push the West out.
So China's main tool here is its huge Belt and Road Initiative. But here's the key thing. It's primarily built on loans, not grants, which is what the West often offered in the past. And this has led to some pretty serious accusations of what people call debt trap diplomacy. You can see the effects in countries like Ghana and Zambia, where it's led to just unsustainable debt and real economic problems.
And when you look at the U.S. approach over the last couple of decades, well, inconsistent is probably the best word for it. It's been like a pendulum swinging back and forth. You had high strategic engagement during the Bush era, then later engagement with Obama, followed by that period of almost total retrenchment under Trump. And that's the trend the Biden administration is trying so hard to reverse right now.
Okay, but this whole story isn't just about what the outside powers want, right? I mean, to really get what's happening, you have to look at it from the perspective of the African nations themselves. So what are their priorities in all of this? And this quote right here from a former U.S. ambassador really gets to the heart of it. African leaders are not just passive pawns in some global chess match. No way. They are very practical, pragmatic actors, and they're making calculated decisions based on what they believe is best for their people and their economies.
So what does that actually mean? Well, for African nations, this isn't about picking some ideological side in a global fight. It's about really practical needs. They need capital to build roads, ports, for economic growth. They want to be treated as partners, not patrons. They want the world to engage with their own regional institutions, like the AU and ECOWAS. And look, they want respect, not to be viewed as some kind of charity case. And interestingly, they also want access to the best products out there, which are often American, but for a variety of reasons, they're just not easily available.
But actually achieving that kind of partnership is tricky. And a huge part of the problem, especially for the West, is something called the tone issue. Even with the best intentions, Western engagement can often come across as patronizing or pejorative. And that kind of tone just completely undermines any attempt to build a real partnership of equals.
All right, so beyond all the economic deals and the military moves, there's another, much quieter competition going on. And this one is the battle for soft power. It's the struggle for hearts and minds across the continent.
And this chart really visualizes a major strategic shift. While you see Western media outlets, think BBC Africa service, actually cutting back, China is doing the complete opposite. They are pouring a ton of money into building up their media presence all across the continent.
I mean, China's executing this really comprehensive, long-term media strategy. They're installing satellites so CCTV can be beamed right into African homes. They're building out communications infrastructure. They're promoting Chinese movies and culture. And they're providing this steady stream of pro-Beijing news content. The goal here is pretty clear. They want to shape the information environment and influence the views of the next generation of young Africans.
Now, don't get me wrong, the West still has a massive advantage when it comes to soft power. That ability to influence through culture instead of force. Hollywood movies, American music, they're hugely popular. But here's the catch. That influence is organic. It's a product of culture and private companies. It's not something a government can just direct, in the same way China can command its state-run media.
Okay, so we've laid out this incredibly complex landscape. The question then becomes, what does a winning strategy actually look like? How do you move forward? Well, according to experts, one of the biggest mistakes, especially for the U.S., is viewing Africa only through the lens of, what does this mean for our competition with China? When you frame it that way, your policy becomes purely reactive. You're always playing defense, instead of proactively building something based on mutual interest and respect.
So, the recommended path forward is all about building a genuine partnership. And what does that look like? Well, first, it means engaging strategically with Africa's own institutions. Second, it's about boosting commerce, actually helping amazing American companies get their products, like those zipline medical drones in Rwanda, into African markets. Third, and this is huge, it's about listening first and adopting that tone of respect. And finally, making smart, cheap investments in public diplomacy, things like Voice of America, that have a massive impact.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, a way to reframe this whole thing. Maybe the real question isn't who's going to win Africa.